Hello, everybody. It's Friday. That means it's time for another topic of the week. So, first things first, last week's topic on the worst war scroll. Lots of good suggestions. If you haven't gotten in a suggestion yet, go back to that video. It's linked down below and put in your suggestion for the worst war scroll. Your one singular, worst suggestion. For this week's topic, though, we're going to turn to, we had the Wrath and Rapture preview this week, and that has both Slaanesh and Khorne in it. Khorne's got a lot of attention, though. Through the end times, they got releases. They had an early book. I like Khorne just fine. I have no problem with them. It's a simple, blunt instrument, right? They were the foundational foe at the dawn of Age of Sigmar. So, like, Khorne has gotten all the love, all the attention. But I've always been a Slaanesh person, and I wanted to spend a moment and kind of just talk about Slaanesh. I think Slaanesh is a fascinating Chaos God. All the Chaos Gods represent something interesting. They're not exactly the sort of mortal sins, or they're not exactly, the most common things we would think of as like traits of humanity. They're more or less just kind of these interesting results of life and the way that they work, and somehow represent sins plus the worst of us plus this other stuff. They're this weird amalgamation of concepts. And I think that's one of the reasons they're fun and interesting. Like, you look at how the Chaos Gods oppose each other, like Tzeentch opposing Nurgle. I guess because Nurgle just believes in, like, uncontrolled life, like organic growth. Nurgle's a bottom-up kind of guy, whereas change is, Tzeentch and the change is very top-down control. I guess, maybe. Like, you can stretch and find these things, but they're not as obvious as, like, this is the one of light, and this is the one of shadow, where it's just like, okay, there's obvious... there's a sort of obvious butting of heads there. It's more nuanced. And in that way, Slaanesh has always been fascinating to me. I've always liked Slaanesh. It was the second army I bought way back in the day. I had my Skaven for like 6 years. I only had one army, and then back like 6-7 years, I don't know. Whenever the Daemonet re-release came out, after the Juan Diaz Daemonets, whenever they made plastic Daemonets, is when I got my first Slaanesh stuff. I know that because I went there when they released and saw them and thought they were really cool and got them. Obviously, I mean, I do think the Juan Diaz are better sculpts to this day, but a lot of people have hatred for the Daemonet sculpts. I like them just fine. I think they're a perfectly fine sculpt to work with. But to each their own. Who can ever say with aesthetic? My personal sense of aesthetic, what draws me to army is look more than anything. Always has been. Because rules are going to change. On a long enough timeline, rules will change. If you're in this hobby to win it, if you're in it to win it, like what I mean by that is, like, if this is a serious thing for you, if you play Warhammer and you say, I'm going to play Warhammer, for a long time, maybe the rest of my life, which is what I think. I mean, I've been playing for 21 years now. I don't suspect that's going to change anytime soon. Could, but who knows? And, like, in that time, my armies have had so many different rule sets and ways they function, it's hard to even keep track. Things have been good, things have been bad, things have been this or that or the other thing, who knows, right? That's all going to change. What doesn't change to me is the aesthetic. If you truly love an army because of the way it looks, I mean, they'll make new models, new things will come out, maybe an army dies, but, like, the general sense of the aesthetic tends to only get refined, right? If it ever gets remade at all. And Slaanesh, the concept of it that sort of births its aesthetic, its guiding aesthetic principles, not the aesthetic of the individual models, because that will change as well. Slower time frame than the rules, but it will change. But the sort of guiding principle, right? You look at Khorne. Khorne has this, like, sort of spikes and brass and skulls. Like, these are the things that have always dominated Khorne models. What Khorne models look like have changed dramatically if you go back and look at the stuff from the 80s, but that same themes run throughout. And when I think of Slaanesh, I think of the combination of, like, horror and beauty. It's this sort of 50-50 mix, right, of something that is both alluring and repulsive at the same time. And I've always been fascinated by it. That's, like, the type of art that I enjoy. I enjoy something that's beautiful and brings you in, but repulses you at the same time, that makes you uncomfortable. It's art that both welcomes you and challenges you, is sort of the idea of the thing. So just as a general aesthetic sense of the world, that's the kind of thing I enjoy. And so Slaanesh has always been a perfect match to that. At the same time, the sort of underlying themes of what Slaanesh represents have always been the one that made the most sense to me. When I look around the modern world I live in and I occupy, when I operate from my own perspective, the other three Chaos Gods are dead. I mean, I guess two of them are. One of them's invisible and you wouldn't know anyways. Like, Khorne isn't... I mean, it's not that there's not violence in the world, there is, but we live in the most peaceful time in human history. There are less murders everywhere in the world than at any other time if you look in a broad sense. You know, year over year that can vary, but when you look at the sweep of history, this is the most peaceful time in all of history as far as deaths by war, murder, anything like that. It's not that there aren't violent, terrible regions in the world. There are. It's just that when you look at the whole sweep of humanity and the trend over time, we live in a blessed, peaceful time that makes the Pax Romana look like a mad age of constant chaos and upheaval. And so that's out. I don't go I don't go drink the blood of my enemies, but in a very real sense, I don't just go get in random fights. Right? I mean, I've been in fights in my life, but I tend to try to avoid physical confrontation. That's sort of just a rule I live by. You look at Nurgle, literally diseases, they're still there. Lots of people die from diseases every year. Many of which are preventable and could be handled. We just don't care to fund some of it. That's why I ran a charity, a couple years back for Doctors Without Borders and stuff like that. But the point is that yes, disease is still a thing, but I mean we've made incredible strides over the past century in beating back the tide of Nurgle. That's something we have a better hand around and are getting a better handle on every day. Tzeentch is just Tzeentch. I don't even know what that means. Changed, sure. I mean, there's still plenty of people in the world who scheme, I guess. So I guess that's always a thing. But when I look from my personal perspective, I'm not a power broker or anything like that. And most of the people I deal with aren't these weird back alley schemers trying to climb the ranks of power. Those people exist, certainly. It's out there. That's a thing in the world. But it's not a part of my life, is what I would point out. Maybe it's part of maybe the lizard people that rule us or whatever. That's part of their thing, but that's just not my experience. I mean that tongue in cheek, by the way. I'm not trying to start a conspiracy theory discussion. But excess is something we all deal with every day. Yeah, if Slaanesh is to be summarized as excess, if that's really the core of what Slaanesh is about, I've gone to dinner and not known when to stop. Right? How many of us haven't? I used to smoke and couldn't and did it a lot too much, not socially. So my point is that we all have a struggle with excess in our lives, whatever that happens to be. The nature of addiction and everything else in the world, that's a thing that's just out there. It's still the problem of humanity. Slaanesh is the one that flourishes in societies. Right? The more civilized society becomes, the more Slaanesh seems to flourish. And I've always been fascinated by that representation of Slaanesh is the strive for something good taken too far. All of the gods somewhat have that. All the Chaos Gods have that, right? Khorne is the will to excel and to prove yourself gone too far, and Nurgle is life gone too dark and too destructive, and all that. I get it. But I've always thought that Slaanesh is the one that is still the most commonly held up as a virtue. We all enjoy having things, right? And want to be more healthy and want to be more in shape and want to own enough stuff to keep our families happy and all that. And that line is so shady to tip over the edge, right? And that's and even where that line would be very difficult to define and moves over time. So that's why I've always found Slaanesh to be fascinating from a sort of thematic perspective. Model-wise, I like most of the range. The old Fiends were stupid. I love the new Fiends. I've always liked Daemonettes. The actual Keeper of Secrets is the worst model in the history of models and should be burnt and erased from history. It should be forever stricken from our memories. I'm sure we'll get a new one that's awesome. The Exalted Keeper is what I actually think of as the Keeper of Secrets. It's what I've always used as my Keeper of Secrets. And I think that's a gorgeous model. Again, a wonderful combination of horror and beauty. So overall, there's I think it aligns. I understand it. I think it's an interesting god, the way that it worms its way into society. I think it's a cool story. I think it's something that's relatable in a way. in, probably the darkest of all possible ways, and that it's a thing we've all struggled with and wish we would struggle with less. So I'm just fascinated by it. But that's why I like Slaanesh. And I wanted to talk about that because I want to know what you think about it. Are you excited to see Slaanesh come back? Wrath and Rapture will probably signal the release of a book here in a few months. So are you excited? What do you think about Slaanesh? Does it resonate with you? Or have you been happy to see it basically, that god waylaid, as it were, for the past couple years and not really been a focus? It's been a long, long, long time. I mean, more than a decade since Slaanesh has gotten any real attention. So this is a big deal for myself, a big fan of the god for a while. But what do you think? Are you excited about the release? Drop your comments down below. As I said, if you haven't, or make a response video on your own personal journey with the Princess of Excess. If you, and as I said, if you haven't voted for your worst source scroll, check out that link. Go vote for that. But as always, appreciate you watching this one. We'll see you next time.